got the cornfield calm, Midwest tone, but he's spitting facts like a dog with a bone. Lanky frame, fire-haired, eyes on the case, breaking down the game and the darkest place. Sports scores to murder boards, Hoosier logic cuts like swords. From Friday lights to chalked out lines, this redhead's brain rewrites the lines inside the Hoosier mind, where the stories twist and stats unwind. He's a legend in flannel, mic in hand, digging deep where few can stand. From touchdowns to crime scenes raw, he's got the truth in every draw. Yeah, step in if you dare to find what's brewing inside the Hoosier mind. He'll talk Pacers, Colts, or Colts on trial. Hoosier humor with a devilish smile. He's that redhead sleuth with a box of clues. Takes your headline, breaks the news. With every stat and every scream, he's painting portraits in your stream. Don't blink, he'll tie it tight. From game night wins to murder flight. Inside the Hoosier mind, where the facts hit hard and the lines are blind. He's a ginger ninja, sleuth and slick, cracking cases play by play quick. From courtrooms to the hardwood floor, he digs for more than just the score. Tune in and don't rewind, you're deep now inside the Hoosier mind.
All right, what's up, everyone? Welcome into Inside the Hoosier Mind, brought to you by Military Broadcast Radio, helping give veterans a voice, as well as Gunfighter Beard Company, a Marine down in South Carolina, gets all of his ingredients local here in the U.S., ships here in the U.S. and whatnot, does absolutely great work, love his stuff, love his products. Go check him out at gunfighterbeardco.com if you want great beard care products. Now, if you don't think mine's great, I get it, but just letting you know the option is there. So we are deep into the college football and the NFL football offseason as a whole. And you can tell that because the same big story just keeps on evolving, and we keep hearing something new about once every week, once every 2 weeks, with the whole Brendan Sorsby update. And that's going to be the first thing we talk about, as well as I have episode 4 of College Football for Dummies, where I actually start going over the Power 4 conferences. We're actually going to start with the ACC, or the Atlantic Coast Conference, for this episode to start with, because I'm going to try to go in alphabetical / numerical order. And then we'll go from there. But nonetheless, though, let's dive into the whole Brendan Sorsby thing to start with. So if you haven't followed, or if you're not aware of the story as a whole, I'll give you a quick, brief synopsis of it. So basically, Brendan Sorsby is a college football athlete, started here in Indiana, went to IU University, was a redshirt freshman, didn't really get to see much playing time, transferred over to Cincinnati, was a starter there for 2 years, and then this past transfer portal actually enrolled at Texas Tech to be their starting quarterback, to which they paid him $5 million for. The bad part, he was gambling that entire time, and not only was he gambling, he was betting on football games as well as his football teams that he was on, which is a huge cardinal sin and a huge no-no in the football world because it damages the integrity of the game. Nonetheless, the beginning of about May, end of April-ish, it came out from the NCAA that, hey man, you're going to be suspended and we're not going to let you play. There's a huge uproar. He eventually found a judge that basically granted him the injunction that would have allowed him to play. However, that opened Pandora's box of everybody basically saying they were going to boycott playing Texas Tech. I believe Nebraska has stood firm on that still, that they are not going to play them, as well as the University of Michigan has also chimed in. I believe theirs is they're going to get rid of a volleyball game that's supposed to happen. Either this season or next season, one of the two. They're supposed to eliminate that with Texas Tech. So the fallout from that is still happening, and there's really no telling how far that is going to continue to go. With the Big 12, with Texas Tech, how other conferences and leagues are going to approach Texas Tech and how that goes moving forward. But nonetheless, though, that's ultimately where we ended up. Shortly after Pandora's box was opened of his Sorsby's intent to, well, his injunction, and he was allowed to play. The NCAA immediately filed an appeal that same day and tried to get it expedited so that way they could say, no, we're gonna do everything we can to basically knock this out and put this down, put this to bed before the football season even starts. Well, it seemed like it was a mutual agreement between Texas Tech and Sorsby that he was going to go apply for the NFL Supplemental Draft. He applied 3 days before the deadline, and we just received word today that the NFL has denied his application, and they've also denied that they're even going to hold the supplemental draft this year, which would be the third year in a row that they've basically declined in hosting it and just having it all together, which they don't have to hold it. It's one of those that doesn't happen very often. It's very, very rare, and it's for very special exceptions. But we do have the letter from Larry Farizani, the general counsel of the NFL Management Council. And here's the letter verbatim to Brandon Sorsby. It says, Dear Mr. Sorsby, we are in receipt of your petition for special eligibility dated June 16th petition. As announced earlier today, the league has elected not to conduct a supplemental draft this year. Under our collective bargaining agreement, the league retains sole discretion to determine whether it is appropriate to conduct a supplemental draft in any given year. The league has not conducted such a draft for several years, and prior to your submission, the league had no plans to do so this year, as no other player has sought entry. Your petition filed 3 business days before the deadline without any supporting information or any documentation, and only after abandoning your recent litigation efforts to avoid NCAA sanctions does not provide a basis for the league to alter those plans. The issues presented by your petition are too significant and too closely tied to the league's core integrity issues to permit meaningful review within the timeline presented. The sole reasons identified in your petition for seeking entry into the supplemental draft are that you have been declared ineligible by the NCAA, you have exhausted all of your avenues to continue in the NCAA, and you now want to play in the NFL. The petition provides no information regarding the basis for or timing of the NCAA's decision. Public sources, however, indicate that in May of 2026, the NCAA issued a determination declaring you permanently ineligible from participation in college athletics based on a sustained pattern of improper gambling activity during your collegiate career at 3 different universities. The league does not have a complete record of the NCAA's investigation, and you did not provide any such materials with your petition. Available information nonetheless indicates that over the course of your collegiate career, you knowingly engaged in repeated and significant violations of NCAA rules designed to preserve the integrity of athletic competition. Reported conduct includes placing wagers on your own team and teammates to avoid detection, establishing or funding accounts in the names of intermediaries who place bets on your behalf, and there are also reports that you may have violated state criminal law. Your petition does not address these matters, nor does it demonstrate accountability for your conduct or indicate whether or how you would adhere to the league's rules and policy governing the integrity of competition. Instead, even after receiving notices of the NCAA's decision rescinding your college eligibility in May, you sought to avoid the consequences of that determination through litigation rather than accepting responsibility for your actions, and you pursued entry into the NFL only after abandoning those efforts. As Commissioner Goodell has emphasized, participation in the NFL is a privilege that carries with it significant responsibilities, including accountability. By all accounts, you are a talented player with the potential for future success, and we encourage you to focus on preparing for possible entry into the NFL through the 2027 annual draft. Sincerely, Lawrence P. Farizani Jr. And again, he is the general counsel for the NFL Management Council. So, for anybody who wants a just really brief synopsis of that, basically the NFL said we are not holding a supplemental draft for you. You need to take accountability. You broke the rules. You did something wrong. You compromised the potential integrity of the game. You have shown basically no remorse. You continue to advocate that it wasn't your fault. You continue to advocate that you are not truly willing to try to accept responsibility, take a punishment, and learn from what you did. And this is pretty common because we've seen this happen in the NFL. We've seen the NFL punish players for doing this when they're in the NFL. Now, as far as whether or not they would try to carry it from college over, maybe, but I highly doubt it. And, much to his point, it's a privilege to be able to do. Now, and for some teams, they may not even want to take the risk. Why have a supplemental draft? Why bet a potential first round pick or second round pick if he may not even be able to enter, or you're not even going to have him for a year? So I definitely think it's one of those you if I'm Brendan Sorsby, you need to come out and you need to make a public apology. You need to make a public apology. You need to accept accountability. You need to just openly admit to everyone, whether it's on a podcast, whether it's, a short TikTok video, a short Instagram video, you need to show that, what, I screwed up. I'm taking accountability for it. I'm going to sit back. I'm not going to participate. His options are super, super limited. Apparently his lawyer is prepared to file an appeal to the NFL Players Association, the NFLPA, to hopefully try to reverse this decision. I'll be honest, I just don't think it's going to happen. I think if truly, if I'm Brendan Sorsby and if my voice ever got to him or ever gets to him, I would say honestly, man, it'd take like the next 2 weeks to just don't do anything with your lawyer, don't have any litigations. Take a week to truly think about what you've done, to truly have that self-reflection and that growth. They're not going to permanently penalize you if you admit that, what, yeah, I screwed up. And you need to say that. And you need to say, I'm prepared to accept any and all consequences, such as, foregoing the ability to play the game that I love, both collegiately and professionally, for at least a year. In the meantime, I'm going to continue to seek treatment. I'm going to continue to be a voice or an advocate on players having these type of issues. And if you even wanted to go more broadly and say, you want to advocate just for mental health in general, or anything or just addictions, anything in that realm is going to put you in a better limelight. And by the time 2027 does come around, you're going to probably be more well respected from doing that. It'll show you have changed. And hopefully, if you stick to it and you truly believe in it and you truly follow it, it will also help you have some type of, self-reflection and growth, to boot with it. So that's what I would hope you would do anyway. But that's just me. Nonetheless, though, so that was the quick little 13 minutes as far as Brendan Sorsby goes, and that whole entire situation. It's crazy. It's unfortunate. And again, we're so far into the off season. We're almost to the end of June, so we're almost to July. So we're actually going to have the College Football 27 coming out, I believe, next week, especially if the early access. If not, it's like I think it's the Monday or Tuesday after July 4th weekend. So there's still a little bit to hold us over until August, September, but that's still a little bit away. But let's get into the second part of the episode, though, of College Football for Dummies, episode 4. So this is where I kind of like talking about this a little bit more, because I talked first about kind of the basics, the offense, the defense, the special teams, the positions that are on the field, kind of how some of the positions work. Now, I'm not going super in depth as far as like all the formations, all the different types of possibilities and things that you can run or do while you're in college football or you're watching it. But I did wanted to cover at least some of the basics. Now let's dive into the really the really like the meat and potatoes of what I would consider this, as far as the teams that make up college football. Now, like I said, I'm not covering all. I think there's like 132 or 134 Division I programs, I think, that are all divided into tiers. You have like FBS. You have FBS as far as Power 4, and then the group of 6. Then you have FCS, which is like its own thing that's kind of separate. They sometimes cross over together, but not a whole lot of times. It that's a whole deep thing. If you really want me to, let me know. I'll do the research and I'll dive into it. But for the most part, a lot of people and a lot of fans, and the thing that draws the most amount of money is the Power Four and the Group of Six, mostly the Power Four. So, like I said, I'm going to start with the first Power Four conference, the Atlantic Coast Conference, or the ACC. And now I'll be fully transparent. The ACC is a conference that I really don't have a dog in the fight for. It's one I'll watch it. I know the rivalries. I know the teams. They have good games. For anybody, again, if you're a beginner and you're wanting to learn about college football, this past college football national championship, Indiana versus Miami. Miami is a representative of the Atlantic Coast Conference, or the ACC. Probably one of the more well-known big brands of the ACC that made a good representation. So the Atlantic Coast Conference is a collegiate athletic conference in the United States, headquartered in Charlotte, North Carolina. They have 18 teams in their conference, and I'm trying to see. Okay, they do technically include Notre Dame in this, which is also weird because Notre Dame is technically an independent, but they play an ACC schedule. They have played in the ACC conference for 1 year during the COVID year. Before that, ultimately ended up switching. And the ACC has seen a lot of movement over the years, as far as its history, as far as who they've had, who they've lost. Some of the former members of the ACC do include the University of Southern Carolina, or the Gamecocks. They used to be a part of the ACC. They left in the 70s to go to the SEC. And then Maryland, who was actually a founding member, as well as South Carolina, but Maryland, being a founding member of the ACC, actually left in 2014 to join the Big Ten, which has kind of been a little bit weird to see and a little bit weird to know, because, again, you hear a name like Atlantic Coast, because many of these teams were all geographically based. You think, okay, Maryland's there on the East Coast, literally on the East Coast, and now they play in what was technically a Midwest conference that has now expanded coast to coast. But some of the other universities that are all in the ACC as of August 2nd of 2024, they have Clemson, they have Duke, they have the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. They have North Carolina State. They have Wake Forest, University of Virginia, Georgia Tech, Florida State, Miami. They have Virginia Tech. They have Boston College. They have Pitt, or the University of Pittsburgh. They have Syracuse. They do technically have Notre Dame, at least during football and whatnot. They have the University of Louisville. They have SMU, or Southern Methodist University. They have the University of Cal Berkeley, and they have Stanford University. So, to give you an idea, so when all of these college football teams, at least initially started, right? Let me see if I can find a full list of all of the teams that ended up joining. Okay, so some of the original members of the ACC was Clemson, was Duke, Maryland, North Carolina State, South Carolina, Wake Forest, and Virginia. So those were the original founding members of the ACC. South Carolina left back in the 70s. They ultimately ended up going to the SEC. Like I mentioned, Maryland ended up leaving in 2014 to go to the Big Ten. So they were a small conference. They had, 3, 6, 8? They had 8. When they lost South Carolina, they were down to about 7. But then they ended up getting Georgia Tech, 1979, and they got Florida State in the 1990s, and then that was kind of the entirety of their conference for a good long while. Now, again, I'm going to give you the history of the conference and how it came to be. There was another conference that kind of went, I would say, almost parallel with the ACC, and that was the Big East. And there's actually a lot of cross-conference battles, and there's a lot of cross-conference rivalries with the Big East. But unfortunately, the Big East ended up going under in 2014, and that left a lot of those teams basically out in the cold. They had to go somewhere. Ultimately, when that happened, a lot of those teams actually ended up reaching out to the ACC and filing applications to see if they could join. The first team to do this actually was Miami. Miami had just won a national title a few years beforehand. They were super successful in the Big East after being an independent for a while. So then they decided to join the ACC. Ironically enough, have not won a conference title since. Virginia Tech ended up joining that same year. Again, they were also kind of a part of the Big East. Virginia Tech, very high up during that time in the 2004 season. Boston College, same thing. They joined in 2005. And then they didn't have any royal movement again until that 2013 2014 time span. Then they ended up actually getting Notre Dame became more of the affiliate with it, which there's a lot of back and forth as to why Notre Dame decided to do that. Apparently, they had a little bit of an issue with the Big Ten. The Big Ten kind of hurt their feelings. They weren't big fans of it, so they decided to go to the ACC, and they've kind of just stayed with that ever since. And then the ACC supposedly slided them this past playoffs when they were fighting harder for Miami to get in over Notre Dame. So that's a whole thing for a whole nother video, but I can cover that if you really want me to. But after the Big East went down, Pitt then joined, or Pittsburgh ended up joining. Syracuse ended up joining. And then about a year later, Louisville ended up joining in 2014. And then the most recent movement that they had, SMU actually paid to join. So that way they could get Power 4 status. They could get a little bit more representation in the future, potentially a lot more money, and they've been very successful ever since. And then California and Stanford ended up joining, mainly because they didn't have anywhere else to go as the Pac-12 eventually died out. And if I do cover the group of six, I can actually talk about the Pac-12, and I may still. We'll see. But nonetheless, before I continue on, MJ, nice to see you, ma'am. Appreciate you joining in. And then Jasper Stacy, hi, appreciate you joining in. Hope you're enjoying the show so far. So the ACC has a pretty interesting dynamic and a pretty interesting makeup. Like I said, when the Big East kind of fell, a lot of those teams still geographically made a lot of sense. Where you kind of lost me with the ACC is when they decided to add Cal and Stanford. Now, part of that is because they are still prestigious universities. Football wise, they're not making a lot of crazy moves. Now, Stanford has a history, so does Cal, of a lot of good players. Still notable players in the NFL that came from Cal. You still have Aaron Rodgers, you have Jared Goff. Marshawn Lynch was also on Cal. He was actually at Cal with Rodgers as his running back. So pretty significant people as far as Stanford goes. Obviously, Andrew Luck came from there, John Elway. You have Christian McCaffrey, who still plays for the 49ers. He was there at Stanford. Jim Harbaugh got probably one of his biggest propelling factors of he went to Stanford, basically rebuilt them as a top program, as a national contending program, and a program that was able to contend at least in the Pac-12 at the time. Made them contenders, which ultimately got him the job at San Francisco. So they do have a proud history, and they are a very smart school. The only bad part is they haven't been good, at least recently, which is the biggest issue. Now, the ACC is interesting because they were in the news quite a bit, with more so around the 2024 timeframe when all of this expansion first started. And part of the reason is because the ACC has historically been looked at as, you could probably argue, one of the weaker of the Power Four conferences. And now some ACC fans might argue that. Some might argue it's the Big 12. Some might argue it's basically not them. And it's mainly because the ACC rotates who's really good in it kind of year in and year out. And what I mean by that is the ACC doesn't do that on purpose. A lot of the teams that are kind of the bigger brands in the ACC, such as Miami, such as Florida State, Clemson there, especially in the early 2010s. You could also probably throw North Carolina in there if you really want to, because they've had last few seasons, they've actually been better at football than what I even expected. they were getting paid less than teams that are in like the SEC or the Big Ten, who have historically been really bad for a long time. Like Northwestern is getting like $81 million a year, and Florida State, Clemson, Miami are getting like 40, $50 million from their TV revenue. And where that comes from is I'm trying to remember the year. It's going to be kind of a pain to try to remember. I believe it was in 2021. They re-signed a deal with ESPN for their broadcast rights and their media rights. So basically, that means ESPN is primarily going to be the host of who broadcasts these games. And when they did that, it was a pretty significant amount of money at the time, but that locked them in until 2036 as far as the contract goes. So it's like is either a 10 or 15-year contract that they have with the ACC. And when your teams like Florida State, Clemson, and Miami, who are all big brands, they're competitive, they want to fight for a national title, they want that $81 million to, help pay for recruiting, help put it towards NIL, help put it towards, rebuilding the stadium, help put it towards building better athletic facilities. It also helps subsidize the other athletic departments that these programs and that these universities run, which again is a whole nother issue as far as when you look at the revenue for what these companies, for what these universities make. Football and basketball are the only ones that have any type of positive equity growth, and all the other ones, they're losing money more than anything. But the money that the football and the basketball programs are able to make help subsidize that and help continue to pay for it. But nonetheless, though, those three schools and Florida State, Miami, and Clemson, they wanted to leave the ACC pretty recently because they're like, we want to get paid or we want a new deal. There's a whole legal fight and a whole legal loophole that they would have to go through to try to get to that. I don't know if they're really ready for that fight or not. As well as if they do want to leave, they have a lot of media rights buyouts that they have to do. So they would have to pay ESPN money and basically forfeit it in order to do that. And I believe at the time it was like $500 million in order for them to leave. Now, every year that they continue to stay, that number starts to go down because they're continuing to come to the end of the contract. Now, they still have about 10 years left, but that number gets progressively smaller every year. So it'll be interesting to see if the ACC still survives. Now, I know this is supposed to be for beginners. It's supposed to be for people who don't necessarily know college football that well. Again, if you want to potentially spark a debate, if you want maybe a little bit of an interesting conversation after you maybe dive in a little bit deeper for college football, if it's something that you fall in love with like I did, bring up the question. Do you think the ACC is going to potentially be around in 5 to 10? Well, I'm going to say 5 to 10. There's a possibility things could change. It's always possible with college football. Hopefully it doesn't, but we'll see. Will it still be around, or will teams like Clemson, Florida State, Miami, will they bolt to the SEC or Big Ten just to be able to get more money, to have a better conference prestige, to be more in a national title picture? And for us as fans, it's a good and bad thing. Good because we get bigger name matchups. Ohio State versus Clemson every year. That'd be pretty solid. I'm sure Ohio State would love to have a revenge game against Miami for knocking them out in the playoffs this past season. And I'm sure Miami would love to face Indiana again. And Florida State versus Michigan, or Penn State versus like North Carolina, if they could get them to join. Like, all of those would be really cool matchups to have. But the bad part is, if you're if you like the old school college football and you kind of like the way things have been for many, many, many years, because that's what you grew up with, that's what you like. It kind of sucks because it's one of those, we're going to see a major conference that has been around for a long time and has a lot of history and a lot of really good rivalries is going to potentially go away if they do this expansion, if they break apart and teams want to go somewhere else for money. So we will see how it goes. Luckily, fortunately and unfortunately, we've seen the fall of a historical conference because of money and pride, etc. So I definitely believe the commissioner of the ACC, who is Jim Phillips, if I remember correctly, James Phillips, sorry. James Phillips, who's been the commissioner since 2021. I think with him having watched what happened to the Pac-12, I think he will do his absolute best to keep the ACC around and probably do a little bit better as far as negotiations and whatnot. But we will see when it comes to that. Now, I do want to touch on one more thing for the ACC, and if there's any that I'm missing, if there's any that if you are watching this and you're an ACC fan, or if you're a fan of one of these teams and you feel like I missed one of the big rivalries, please tell me. I do want to clarify and preface by saying these rivalries are within the ACC only. I did not do rivalries of like cross. So I didn't do Louisville and Kentucky. I didn't do Notre Dame and Miami. I didn't do Clemson and South Carolina. I didn't do Georgia and Georgia Tech because both teams aren't in the ACC. Now they're significant. They are significant as far as the ACC goes and as far as its history, but they're not big ACC rivalries. So I just want to preface that and throw that out there before anybody's like, this guy has no idea what he's talking about. But again, if I miss any, please let me know. Okay. So if you're able to see it on the screen, if you're watching it on video, cool. If not, I will break it down for you via audio. So these are some of the big rivalries that happen in the ACC, and they usually happen yearly, not all the time, but yearly. So some of the oldest, so actually the oldest rivalry for the ACC is North Carolina versus Wake Forest, which is kind of down here towards the bottom. So North Carolina versus Wake Forest is actually the oldest. That started all the way back in 1888 here in the ACC. A couple other ones. You have Clemson versus Georgia Tech. That started in 1898. You have technically Cal versus Stanford when they became an ACC members in 24. They actually started playing in 1892. So pretty significant amount of time. Let's see, what are some other kind of older rivalries that have happened? You have North Carolina versus NC State. They first started playing in 1984. The ACC's longest rivalry, as far as one that has continued to play every single year since 1910, is NC State versus Wake Forest. I don't know why this says the ACC's and the South's oldest rivalry, first played in 1892. Okay. Anyway, that's weird. It says the South's oldest rivalry in Virginia versus North Carolina. The ACC and South's oldest rivalry first played in 1892. Where did they get that 1888 is not as old as 1892? Yeah, anyway, and then probably one of the biggest rivalries for the ACC that first started happening in 1888, the Victory Bell in Duke versus North Carolina. So some of these are pretty significant. I mean, the Carolina schools, North Carolina versus Duke, North Carolina versus NC State, North Carolina versus Wake Forest. There is NC State versus Wake Forest. All of them are all within the state of North Carolina. Those are pretty big rivalries. Probably the two biggest would be North Carolina and Duke. Not as much in football. It correlates more to basketball because they've both historically been really good basketball schools. But it does kind of spill over into the football side a little bit. It's just one of those. Duke is not typically one of the best football schools that the ACC has to offer, and it's typically not one of the best football schools in general. But of course, North Carolina versus Duke is probably one of the biggest ACC rivalries. Florida State versus Miami, just because it's the same thing. It's another inner Florida rivalry that you have that's really good. Unfortunately, it doesn't happen every year. I definitely think it should. But there's a lot of hate there. You have the inner Virginia rivalry in Virginia versus Virginia Tech. That is an absolute big one. Clemson versus Georgia Tech. I didn't really know that this was a big time rivalry, just personally. Not that I don't believe it. It's just one of those, I didn't think that was the case. I think they actually even have a name for it, believe it or not, which kind of surprised me a little bit. Let's see, where is it? Oh yeah. First played in 1898, a little bit little bit weird. Was not expecting that from them. Then you have Clemson versus NC State. This is actually also a pretty old rivalry, come to find out. This one, it's called the Textile Bowl, apparently, and it was first played in 1899. Was not expecting that. Another one that's kind of a surprise is for an O'Rourke McFadden Trophy. They first played in 1940, but the trophy wasn't awarded till 08. Was Clemson versus Boston College. Again, Boston College not historically been the most competitive school, especially of late being in the ACC. Pitt versus Syracuse, that's kind of more of a Big East thing. Same with Boston College versus Syracuse. Clemson versus Florida State, kind of like I mentioned, they're the big powerhouses of the ACC, or at least historically have been. When you look at the ACC here of lately, typically it's been Clemson, Florida State, then recently of Miami. Those are usually the big three coming out of the ACC. As far as any type of playoff or national championship representation, it's usually been them. And then North Carolina is just kind of bringing up the rear. And then, of course, they came over for the Pac-12, but now in the ACC, Cal and Stanford, also kind of a big thing just because they're both towards almost the center of California. So these are some of the big ACC rivalries. Again, they're not, being somebody who I watch the ACC. I enjoy college football. These aren't exactly the rivalries that get me like super excited. And usually if I do, it's because I want both teams to be good. Like if it's Clemson versus Florida State, I want both of them to be absolutely top tier. I don't want one to be good and one to not be. So that is the history and a little bit about the ACC. Not a whole lot to go off on about that. It's only a 73-year-old conference, so not super old, but not super young. Like I said, it's one I don't really have much of a fight in because I don't watch much of it. Growing up in Big Ten country, watched a lot of Ohio State, a lot of Michigan State, Penn State. Watched a lot of that. I'm a fan of a SEC school as far as LSU, so a lot of SEC games. And then I do like the Big 12. The Big 12 is just kind of always one of those. It's been a rotation throughout the years. So the ACC is just kind of the one, and some people may hate me for this. The ACC is kind of my least favorite of the Power Four, just personally. But let me know what you think. Let me know who's your favorite rivalry as far as the ACC goes. Who do you think should have been mentioned? Did I forget somebody? Is there somebody that, I mentioned that you're like, yeah, actually, that's not as big of a rivalry as you might think it is? Let me know down below. Let me know in the comments. Appreciate everybody tuning in. It is going to be a little bit of a short episode today, but we will be back next week. I'm going to talk about the Big Ten next week and all of its history and why it's called the Big Ten, but it has 18 teams. We'll get into that a little bit more next week. But appreciate everybody watching. Please make sure you go check out Military Broadcast Radio and everything that they have. We have a team of great veterans. They get to tell their stories. They give life advice. They interview other great veterans, other great people, as far as businesses, how they kind of came up to be, their stories. And overall, MB Radio is great. It's a nonprofit. It helps veterans learn how to podcast, learn how to public speak, because I know it probably looks easy. This is just a whole lot of practice as far as, publicly speaking. And you got to remember too, you're kind of talking to yourself for the most part, unless somebody, interacts with you in a chat. So it's not exactly the most comfortable thing to basically talk to yourself and bounce ideas off of you. But that's where Military Broadcast Radio comes in. They help you with that. They coach you through it. They give you tips. They give you notes. They give you all sorts of stuff, and they help give you the technology to be able to do it too. So definitely check them out. And like I said, also check out Gunfighter Beard Company. Like I said, he's a Marine in South Carolina. He makes all of his stuff by hand, all the batches. He gets all of his ingredients local, and he ships all over here in the U.S. Absolutely super nice guy. Keep in mind, I don't get anything out of him. I don't have promo code. I don't get any percentage of anything if you go. It was one of those. I reached out to him because I love his product. I love his stuff. And I was like, hey, man, can I add you as a sponsor on the show? And he's like, absolutely. So I was super grateful that he let me do that. And again, if you like more of my content, check me out. I'm pretty much everywhere on social media inside the Hoosier Mind, Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, all of it. I'm there. You can check me out. You can, interact with me, ask me questions, DM me, tell me I'm great. Tell me I'm suck. I'm good with all of it. But appreciate everybody tuning in, and we will see y'all next week.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in to Military Broadcast Radio. As we wrap up today's show, We want to remind you that the podcast of today's episode will be available right after we go off the air. So if you missed any part of the show or want to listen again, be sure to check it out. And remember, we're here to support and honor our veterans. Your stories and experiences matter, and we are committed to giving you a platform to share them. That's right. We're here to give our veterans a voice. So don't forget to catch the podcast and stay connected with us. Giving our veterans a voice.